On our first afternoon after our arrival in Beijing, we were taken across the city by our guide Miranda to the Summer Palace, located about 9 miles northwest of the centre of Beijing. It's not to be confused with the smaller Old Summer Palace, built about 40 years earlier, located about 4 miles closer to the old city, which was originally called the Imperial Garden. The Summer Palace was built in 1750 by the Emperor Qianlong of the Qing dynasty to celebrate his mother's 60th birthday. It was originally known as the Garden of Clear Ripples. No, Graham, not the Garden of Clear Nipples. Its Chinese name, Yi Xuan, translates as the Garden of Nurtured Harmony or the Garden for Maintaining Health and Harmony. In 1860, Beijing was invaded by the Anglo-French Allied forces during the Second Opium War, when the British forced China to legalise the importation of opium and open up all its seaports and the Yangtze River to foreign trade. At this time the palace was badly damaged and China was forced to acquiesce to the will of the West, and its independence was severely curtailed. The palace was restored around 1886 by the last Empress of China, the power-hungry Empress Dowager Cixi, who squandered the money that was originally destined to strengthen the Chinese navy. Cixi, sometimes referred to today as the Dragon Lady, was one of the concubines of the Qing Emperor Xianfeng. Most of the emperor's concubines never got to meet him, but Cixi persuaded the eunuchs to ensure she was taken to his bed. He had many wives and concubines, but only Cixi gave him a son. So she moved up in court circles, and upon the death of the emperor was made the Dowager Empress. The son became the emperor at the age of 18, but proved to be incompetent, and died of venereal disease a few years later in 1875, and Cixi was once again at the helm of imperial power. Some years later, the son of a younger sister was proclaimed emperor, but in practice he was very much under the control of Cixi, and never had any real power, and was eventually forced to abdicate. He died in 1908, just one day before Cixi herself died, and was succeeded by his nephew Pui, chosen by the Empress, who ascended the throne at the tender age of just 2 years and 10 months, known today as the last emperor. He reigned as a child for about 4 years until power in China was seized by the nationalists in 1912. Although he was nominally returned to power in 1917 for just 11 days. His later life was just as eventful. Patronised by the Japanese in the 1920s and later captured after the end of World War II by the Soviets, he was later repatriated to China by Mao Zedong and lived as an ordinary citizen until his death in 1967. The palace is entered through the East Palace Gate. It had 3 doors, the centre one reserved exclusively for the emperor. Inside the gate is a second, leading to a courtyard in front of the Renshudian Hall, which means the Hall of Benevolence and Longevity, from the famous Confucian saying, "The ruler who reigns benevolently will have a long life." The Empress Dowager Cixi managed the affairs of state from behind a screen in this building. The hall leads to the Garden of Virtue and Harmony, where the Dowager Empress and her son would watch performances of the Beijing Opera. Beyond the garden are the shores of the Kunming Lake, which today is a popular spot for tourists and locals alike. The new Summer Palace was built about 800 years before Cixi's death in the grounds of the gardens originally created much earlier in the Jin dynasty, and the lake, which today occupies about 2/3 of the grounds, was built 100 years later as a reservoir for the city by the Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan of the Yuan dynasty, the grandson of the great Genghis Khan. Running parallel to the shores of the lake is a long, covered passage spanning nearly 800 yards, built by the Emperor Qianlong for his mother so that she could take exercise regardless of the weather. Later, the Empress Dowager Cixi would take exercise here every day after breakfast. The inside of the building has been decorated with over 14,000 Su-style paintings depicting Chinese scenes. The passage passes the Tower of Buddhist Incense, built on the side of the hill that borders the lake. On the 1st and 15th day of each month, Empress Dowager Cixi would go there to pray and burn joss sticks. Further along the gallery is another gate into the palace grounds which stands in front of the so-called Arch of the Colourful Clouds. At the end of the long gallery is a pontoon where the dragon boats land. Nearby stands the so-called marble boat. It was first erected in 1755 by the Emperor Qianlong as a lakeside pavilion. It was restored by Empress Cixi, who added a 2-storey structure and remodelled it to look like a western paddle steamer. It's not actually made of marble, most of it is made of wood, painted just to look like marble. Here we join one of today's dragon boats to cruise back to our starting point across the Kunming Lake. I wonder what the Dragon Lady would have made of today's dragon boats, full of tourists and their cameras and their kids.